All right. Geezy Truth News.
Good get them as well. Boom. 2 plus 2 is 4. Minus 1, that's 3. Quick maths. Everyday man's on the block. Smoke trees. See your girl in the park. That girl was a uckers. When the tongue went quack, 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 you man were ducking. Go tight and sneak.
Coming to you live from the GTN studios.
You've got a frisbee. Trap, trap, trap on the road. Moving that cornflakes. Rice crispy. All time I girl Whitney. On the road doing 10 toes. Lama toes. You man fought, I froze. I see a plane out in my pose. If she's not running, I post. Hi, look at your nose.
Special guest starring Jim Fetzer. That's right, the one and only.
Let's go. Pop up the 4-door with the 440 was 1, 2, 3, and 4. Chilling in the corridor. Your dad is 44, and he's still calling out for a draw. Let him know. When I see him, I'm gonna spin his jaw. Take my kicks by force. Stand my shot by force. Your girl know that I got the sauce. No ketchup. Just sauce. Raw sauce. Boom. Yo. Bah. The thing goes skrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr You don't know. Big shot. Yo, yeah. Alright. Fire the police. You get me? Man's not hot. I said man's not hot. I said the man's not hot. The girl told me, take off your jacket. I said, babes, man's not hot.
Wow. Brought to you by Fabio Productions. And now, the moment we've all been waiting for. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you. And welcome to Geezy Truth News. Well, we got a big show for you guys today. Got a lot to talk about. We got a special guest. Got a lot to discuss. Lots of things to figure out. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you, everybody, for making this happen. All right. It is August 29th, 2019. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Now that the introductions are over, we got to get to business. Pretty much, thank you very much. Pretty much as an introduction, Jim Fetzer is a worldwide author, PhD, former Marine. I mean, the list goes on and on. Genius. Has done a lot of things. Has his own blog. Has his own website. jamesfetzer.org. Check it out. We've mentioned him plenty of times on the show, and his link should be at the bottom. His link should be on the right. All of his info should be all available. Everybody, please look up jamesfetzer.org. Look up Jim Fetzer. Do your research. This guy has done an enormous amount of research, an enormous amount of studying. Thank you very much. And it's very serious. He's written books such as the Sandy Hook. Nobody died at Sandy Hook. This is one of his books right here. This is great. Highly recommend to pick it up and read it. And he's also written about the Boston bombing, and he's done many other things, and probably writing more recent articles right now. and we'll find out what's going on. See what's the updates, anything new, and all that good jazz. So let's figure it out. Let's see what happens. And as far as I know, no big new updates since we've last talked with the pedogate and then the Fed thing. You know, again, as far as I'm concerned, there's former whistleblowers saying that Epstein is not dead, that he was taken somewhere. I mean, if you just do your research, I mean, these are. Don't listen to me. I have no credentials. Look up Kevin Shipp, former CIA whistleblower. Look up all these different kinds of guys who have all these credentials and back up all their claims with facts. So, so that's what happens. Let's see. We're going to set it all up here soon. And that's about it from, and then we still haven't heard from, for the quick updates. Let's see. What is that? qmap.pub. Still nothing there. Right? August 1st was still the last one. Number 3570. So I don't know. I mean, he said that the last quote is the month of August is traditionally very hot. You have more than you know. So, coats before D class. That obviously means something. I'm not exactly sure. But the month of August is traditionally very hot. It's coming to a close here. So, dotting our I's and crossing our T's here. Making sure everything's all set up. Let's give it a go here. We got Tom and Jerry over there twiddling on the dials. Getting all set up here. Alright, here we go. Let's give it a whirl.
Yes.
Hello, Professor
Hello,
Jim Fetzer.
Yeah. Are you doing a video?
Yeah, that's right. How you doing?
Did you want me to turn on my camera?
Sure, if you would like.
I can fix the light too.
Oh yeah, no worries. It's just something. Something's better than nothing. So how are you doing, Professor Fetzer?
Good. Let me turn on the light. Hang on.
All right. Right on.
Yeah, better.
Yeah, much better. So how are you doing? What's new? What's going on?
Good. Oh, well, in the middle of the lawsuit thing here, that's saying, what all do you want to cover and how long do you want to go?
For as long as you want, for as much as we can cover and as much as possible.
Well, I could do an hour.
Okay.
You don't have a specific list of, agenda for our conversation, or?
Well, I do. I mean, one of the biggest things I wanted to talk about was Epstein and whatever else is going on. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff going on, and
Sure.
Just want to hear your 2 cents, and also what's going on with the lawsuit and everything else. So,
Okay.
ready when you are.
Absolutely. So you want to give me a countdown, and I'll record it too, and then we'll have 2 copies.
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead and start now.
Well, you're going to want to
introduce the show, right? So
Oh, yeah,
I'll just say 3, 2, 1, and then I'll start recording. Okay.
Yeah, and I already did some of the introductions, so go ahead. So 3, 2, 1.
Hey, I'm very glad to be with you here today. Give me your agenda, and I'll be glad to address it.
All right. Well, like I said previously, the biggest thing on my mind, and I would hope on many other people's minds, is the Epstein thing. That's pretty much the biggest thing that has happened that I'm aware of. And apparently there's whistleblowers out there like Kevin Shipp who say that he was taken, that he's still alive, and all. And I mean, there's, I'm sure there's plenty of theories, but bottom line is that just like any other false flag or whatever's going on, obviously the narrative that they're saying that he killed himself, I mean, that's, who's going to believe the narrative that they're saying?
Yes, I think that skepticism is very well founded in that the weight of the evidence suggests that he was in fact taken into a witness protection program so Hillary couldn't have him taken out. The Clinton death count is probably around 200 at this point in time, and I can't imagine a greater threat to her and others in this massive pedophile operation than Jeffrey Epstein, who seems to know not only where all the bodies are buried, but where all the videos are located, because his whole operation was clearly a Mossad blackmail effort to put prominent, influential American politicians primarily, but not exclusively, into compromising situations where they could be manipulated by means of threats of exposing their improper and illicit activities, especially on Little St. James Island, which Jeffrey suggested he wanted to rename Little St. Jeff. We have the fellow who was his IT guy for about 10 years explain how very demanding he was about having all the audio and the video very, very high quality all over the island, and that there was a point at which he became uneasy about the whole thing and decided he couldn't handle it any longer and quit working for Epstein. Now, the security in the Manhattan Correctional Center would have been very, very substantial, and the occupancy, the features of the room in which he was incarcerated would have made it extremely difficult for anyone to commit suicide had they been so disposed. We have recent reports from the attorneys on his side that he was actually in a good mood, that he was, positively oriented, not despondent, not in a suicidal frame of mind. Besides, the man being a massive narcissist, I think it's far-fetched to imagine a person like that is going to commit suicide. It's virtually not the case that anyone who is in love with themselves is going to contemplate suicide. Moreover, Cyril Wecht, who is a world-famous coroner who has performed over 20,000 autopsies, said that the evidence, including the breaking of this small bone in the throat, was inconsistent with suicide, but was consistent with manual strangulation, suggesting he could have been murdered. Now, further evidence that that's not, in fact, what actually took place, and that we may have indeed an autopsy on the wrong body, is that when he was taken out, we have a photograph of him on a gurney, only the facial features are not those of Jeffrey Epstein, but appear to be those of Tony Rodham, Hillary Clinton's brother, who died mysteriously on 7 July, where it's also not the case that the facial features are drained of blood, which is typically what happened. He ought to have a pale complexion, but very pink. That's indicative of blood flow. In other words, that the body of the photographed person was in fact actually alive when the photograph was taken, not deceased. Not only that, but the photograph, although purportedly in a hospital, was clearly not taken in a hospital. It was taken in a firehouse. There's a sign on the wall talking about cutting off your engines, and there are multiple other indications that this was not a sanitary facility. The walls are quite dirty, and so forth. Indeed, some have found that this was actually stock footage from an EMT training video, where they had, simply adapted it to present an apparently deceased Jeffrey Epstein, except it isn't Epstein and doesn't appear to be deceased. So, it gets down to taking a real close look at the kind of evidence where the key to sorting these things out is separating the authentic from the inauthentic or fabricated evidence, which has been illustrated by case after case where I've done collaborative research with the best experts on JFK, on 9/11, Wellstone, Sandy Hook, the Boston bombing, Orlando and Dallas, Parkland, Charlottesville, Las Vegas. I could address in detail and have books on most of these, by the way, at moonrockbooks.com, what you might think of as your conspiracy catalog, where you can find serious, scholarly, scientific research dissecting each of these cases, where since my retirement from the Duluth campus of the University of Minnesota in 2006, which completed an academic career of 35 years offering primarily courses in logic, critical thinking, and scientific reasoning. So it's part and parcel of my intellectual background to be an expert in appraising the relationship between hypotheses and theories, and I've made a lot of contributions to clarifying the nature of scientific reasoning, the role of probability in these contexts, and associated issues that are related to the nature of scientific knowledge, which we know, of course, is never certain. The only certain knowledge we ever possess is in the context of pure mathematics and logic, where from premises that can have a truth that is stipulated, or as it is said, analytical, such as if you define a sentence as or a statement as a sentence that's either true or false, but not both, then it turns out that the logical formulation P or not P, meaning either it's true or it's not the case that it's true, must be true. That cannot be false, just given the meaning of language. So that in various contexts where you have these kinds of statements which are known as analytic, some of which follow from definitions. For example, if you know John is a bachelor, then John is unmarried, because it's a property of being a bachelor that you're an unmarried adult male. So if you're an unmarried adult male, then of course it follows that you're unmarried. So bachelor has the same meaning as unmarried adult male, that John is a bachelor yields by inference, trivial logical inference, deductive, that John must be unmarried, that John must be an adult, that John must be, single. I mean, all those things just follow trivially. But that's the only context in which you have knowledge that can be said to be certain. In all empirical contexts related to events in space-time, we're dealing with a certain degree of uncertainty, where the discovery of additional evidence or alternative hypotheses may force us to reject hypotheses we previously accepted, accept hypotheses we previously rejected, and leave others in suspense. Oh, the third property that follows, obviously, is that John is a male, since we're talking about a bachelor as an unmarried adult male. Now, that even extends to something as trivial as your actual name. How do you know your name? Well, you've always been called your name since you were a child. There's a birth certificate that declares what your name was. You may have gone through a christening process in a church or what have you, but it's all inferential. Those documents, those records, that all could theoretically be fabricated. So even though you have what everyone would regard as good evidence, absent some indication of fraud, nevertheless, your conclusion cannot be certain, meaning it's always possible it could be false. Even something as trivial as the date today is something we know by inference. We have calendars, yes, we have newspapers, radio programs, clocks, but still, theoretically, in principle, they could all be rigged to lead us to a state of false belief. Well, if it's possible to be in a state of false belief, then you're in a situation where you lack certainty, even though it could be said you have what could be regarded as practical certainty, because you have no good reason to doubt it, and the sources you're using to draw your inference have been highly reliable in the past. Nevertheless, theoretically, your state of knowledge is uncertain. Now, when it comes to a Jeffrey Epstein, dead or alive, when I talk about the weight of the evidence suggesting that the man is still alive, that's because the evidence substantiating that he's actually deceased appears to be fake or fabricated or inconsistent with what we would expect. You have Cyril Wecht, this famous medical examiner, reporting, for example, that the physiological evidence, the damage to the neck and so forth, is not what it ought to be had the man in fact committed suicide. Well, that of course suggests he did not commit suicide. That leaves open the possibility of strangulation, but also that in fact he was taken out and removed. We also have additional reports that the cameras, see, there ought to be video surveillance here. This is a man who was previously on a suicide watch. He's supposed to be under 24/7 surveillance. We get a further report that he was taken off suicide watch. No one seems to understand how or why that took place. The cameras that ought to have been covering his cell, which would give us what we would regard as the most reliable evidence, absent any indication that they themselves have been tampered with, were inoperable at the time. Well, that's such an improbable circumstance that should take place at just that place and time that it's rather positive evidence that, in fact, this was all contrived. We have a report that a fellow in a green military uniform showed up in a van that wasn't recorded and took Jeffrey Epstein out and swapped him for what might be presumed to be a dead body with some sort of resemblance to Epstein. But when you have these situations controlled, it might not even matter whether the body is a close resemblance or not. They have a body. We have the medical examiner, a woman from New York City, who's conducted an autopsy and reported it was strangulation. It was attended by another physician by the name of Michael Bannon, who it turns out was a short-term temporary medical examiner for New York City years and years ago, which I verified by actually calling the medical examiner's office about him after he had been the head of the medical panel for the House Select Committee on Assassinations when it reinvestigated the death of JFK and of Martin Luther King. That was really an absurd travesty, because what they did with the House Select Committee was essentially try to recompose the whitewash to claim Lee Oswald had been killed. Just to give you one stunning illustration, the physicians in Parkland and witnesses at Dealey Plaza and others all reported a fist-sized blowout at the back of JFK's head. If you were to double up your fist and put it at the back of your head, that's approximately the location where this fist-sized blowout occurred. The first to report it was Clint Hill, who was Jackie Kennedy's Secret Service agent. Virtually everyone in the world knows how Clint Hill rushed up to the back of the presidential limo when Jackie was climbing out on the trunk. She was actually going after a chunk of Jack's skull and brains that had been blown out in order to retrieve them, which she would hold in her hand all the way to Parkland Hospital. And then after she had composed herself, after Jack's moribund body had been taken into trauma room number 1, she entered and turned to the anesthesiologist, extending her hand with this debris, asking, "Will this help?" The most poignant moment in the history of the assassination, because while Jackie Kennedy knew a great deal about culture, art, music, theater, and so forth, she was abysmally ignorant of ballistics, wounds, brain surgery, and the like. So, of course, Jack was, in fact, actually dead in Dealey Plaza. In fact, the mortician who prepared the body for funeral, Thomas Evan Robinson, observed the body. The facial features were discolored, indicating that he was dead instantly. Now, to go further, when the Bethesda autopsy occurred, and this was all improper, that they forcibly removed the body from Parkland because the only crime that had been committed at the time was murder. That was a state offense, and under Texas law, it required an inquest to be conducted in Texas. But the Secret Service, who I'm sorry to say were in on it, forcibly removed the body, got it onto Air Force One. Now, while it was being offloaded at Andrews and all the bodies were on the bronze ceremonial casket, in fact, the body had already been removed from the casket and was being offloaded opposite side of the plane into a helicopter, where it appears to have been flown to Walter Reed Hospital, where the best forensic pathologists in the military were present to remove bullet fragments. It would not have done to have fragments of different size and caliber show up in the body because they had a single assassin scenario they sought to support evidentially. And then the body was put in a body bag in a pinkish gray shipping casket and taken over to the back of the Bethesda Medical Hospital to the morgue in a black hearse, where it was unloaded by several of the medical technicians who'd participated in the autopsy. Meanwhile, Jackie and this vast entourage were proceeding toward Bethesda in the gray Navy ambulance with a ceremonial bronze coffin within. While Gerald Custer, for example, who's a medical technician who actually took the x-rays of Bethesda, was proceeding upstairs to develop x-rays he'd already taken. He peered out the window and saw Jackie coming to the front of the hospital in the company of Robert McNamara, and was puzzled and said to himself, what's going on here? Because, of course, Jack was already in the morgue. His body was already undergoing autopsy. It was part of the deceit and deception of the whole elaborate scam, which the government has been perpetrating on the American people at least since JFK. And of course, more recently, 9/11. Anyone who wants more about JFK might want to review my video, JFK, Who is Responsible and Why, which they can find on BitChute, BITCHUTE, which is a secure website. YouTube has taken down so many of my videos and blogs. Well, not YouTube on the blogs, but on the videos, and I've had to find a secure website. There's a second about 9/11 where I'm just reposting some blogs from the few years back on my blog at jamesfetzer.org. So for an update as we approach the 18th observance of 9/11, which of course was not conducted by 19 Islamic terrorists hijacking 4 aircraft under the control of a guy off in a cave in Afghanistan. It's such an absurd theory, and we've been able to disprove it on virtually every count. I would say none of the major elements of the official account of 9/11 are capable of being sustained. So if you want to review as we approach 9/11, go again to BitChute for 9/11, Who is Responsible and Why. And the part, no doubt, that will be most surprising concerns the aircraft, because none of the 9/11 aircraft actually crashed on 9/11. It's fascinating. 2 of them, Flight 11 North Tower and 77 Pentagon, were not even in the air that day. And the other 2, Flight 93 and 175, were tracked by pilots for 9/11 Truth, who discovered that Flight 93 was over Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, after it had purportedly crashed in Shanksville, and that Flight 175 was over Harrisburg and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, after it had officially hit the South Tower, where I myself obtained FAA registration data on the planes that were used for those 2 flights, where of course the same plane can be used for different flights, one day from Tampa to Chicago, the next from New York to LA, and discovered the planes used for those 2 flights were not formally taken out of service or deregistered until 28 September 2005, raising the obvious questions: how can planes that weren't even in the air crashed on 9/11, and how can planes that crashed on 9/11 have still been in the air 4 years later? Now, many Americans are unaware, but Osama bin Laden was our man in Afghanistan. He was actually an officer with the CIA. He was Colonel Tim Osman. He was instrumental in getting Stinger missiles into the hands of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, which they used to shoot down Russian planes and helicopters, and drove the Soviet Union out of Afghanistan. He was actually visited in a hospital in Dubai not long before his death on 15 December 2001 in Afghanistan, where he was buried in an unmarked grave. There were local obituaries, and both CNN and Fox News published a report about his death on 26 December 2001. They were both recently still available online, but the government's or its operatives have been doing a good job of trying to prune the internet of everything that's truthful about any of these events I'm addressing. So It's a stunning situation we're in today. In any case, after the body was brought to Bethesda, James Humes, who was in charge of the autopsy, who was himself a physician but had never conducted an autopsy on a gunshot victim before, took a cranial saw to the skull of JFK and greatly enlarged the wound so that it would look more like something that might have occurred had JFK been leaning far forward over a shot from behind, taking off the whole back of his head. But it's enormous. I've compared it in the following way. The fist-side blowout is like the heel of a whole footprint after Humes is done using his cranial saw, but he performed his feat, a body alteration in front of two witnesses, one of whom was Thomas Evan Robertson, the mortician, who had prepared the body for funeral, such that when the Assassination Records Review Board deposed key figures who'd been involved in the assassination and handling the body, he explained, when they showed him a diagram with dotted lines, oh no, the doctors did that, how Humes had used a cranial saw to expand the wound. Well, what's fascinating then about the House Select Committee, that Michael Bannon, who is the witness here to attend the autopsy at the request of the family, chaired, was they completely closed up all that massive blowout at the back of the head, such that they reduced it to a small wound in the very crown at the top of the head, which is absurd. The Bethesda pathologist had actually accurately determined that there was a shot to the back of the head, but it was lower down in the vicinity of the external occipital protuberance. That's a small bump at the back of your head where you'd recline if you were in a bathtub, 4 inches higher. I mean, this is a discrepancy of such a magnitude that even a first-year medical student couldn't commit such a blunder. Clearly, a deliberate obfuscation, which is completely inconsistent with the Bethesda autopsy report, which, by the way, lays out in mathematical detail the dimensions of this wound. The first expert to discern what was going on was David Lifton in his completely brilliant book, Best Evidence, first published in 1980. When I became serious about JFK research, I learned more from reading Lifton's book than from any other source, and that was in 1992. So I've been engaged in serious research on all these subjects since that period of time. So, you know, for not quite, 25 years or so. In any case, so you have 3 completely different depictions of the wound, the fist-sized blowout, Parkland and other witnesses, then the enormous expanded back of the head described in mathematical detail in the Bethesda autopsy report, then the contraction to a small wound at the top of the head by the House Select Committee. This is how blatant the government can be in duping the American people. And of course, most of the public doesn't have any research skills or the inclination to study these events. Nevertheless, a very high percentage of the public does not believe the official story, where further research has confirmed that indeed the alleged assassin Lee Oswald was actually captured in a very famous photograph taken by AP photographer James I. Calchins, standing in the doorway of the book depository as the JFK motorcade passed by. This was Held Weisberg's conclusion, which he talked about in the last 4 pages of his photographic whitewash, the second volume in his whitewash series, published already in 1967, and where Jim Garrison, also the celebrated district attorney from New Orleans, had concluded that Lee had been in the doorway too, although it never received sufficient attention. Well, research involving Ralph and Kay, a group of others, Dennis Camino, more recently Larry Rivera, have confirmed that indeed it was Lee Oswald in the doorway there, based on the height, the weight, the build, the shirt, and the T-shirt he was wearing, which are the same as the height, the weight, the build, the shirt, and the T-shirt he was wearing when he was arrested. Whereas arrest took place with preternatural speed. In fact, the arrest report for Lee Oswald is dated before he was actually arrested. I mean, it's that bad. It's that bad. So, returning ever so briefly to 9/11 and then back to Epstein, we just have a whole host of evidence about the fabrication of the event, because 9/11 was actually brought to us compliments of the CIA, the neocons in the Department of Defense, most of whom had come from the Project for a New American Century and were dual U.S.-Israeli citizens and the most sought. What you have to understand about 9/11 is that it was conducted in order to convince the American people that there was justification for the United States to move massively into the Middle East and wars, invasions, destruction, devastation against the modern Arab states that had served as a counterbalance to Israel's domination of the entire region, and eventually to confront the Persian nation of Iran, which Israel wants to defeat because it is its major rival for influence in the Middle East, where Israel wants to be the dominant entity and to expose its borders quite vastly to create the greater Israel as Zionist dreams, which takes a big chunk of Egypt, a whole lot of Saudi Arabia, Syria, all of Lebanon, all of Jordan, parts of Iraq. It's really stunning when you understand the real history here. So everyone needs to study the Greater Israel Project and the motivation behind 9/11. Again, I recommend, and probably the most startling aspect will be that we have massive evidence that the demolition of the Twin Towers, which were very robust, well-constructed buildings, was done with nuclear devices. I mean, so that I have two books on 9/11. One is entitled The 9/11 Conspiracy on the Science and Politics of 9/11, based upon a conference I organized for Scholars for 9/11 Truth in 2007, a society that I had founded in December 2005 to bring together experts from diverse fields, engineers of various kinds, structural, mechanical, civil, aeronautical, as well as pilots, physicists, and others in collaborative research, where you can still find the website for scholars at 911scholars.org, which I've not been updating in recent years, but which still gives you really valuable resources for access. And then the second book, American Nuked on 9/11, complements the CIA, the neocons, and the Department of Defense and the Mossad, which is available at moonrockbooks.com. Now, returning to Jeffrey Epstein, when you look at the balance of the evidence and you're confronting the two alternative hypotheses, he actually committed suicide and he's dead, or that the suicide was faked and he remains alive, you have to assess those using the principle of inference to the best explanation, which applies the likelihood principle, which is the most prevalent principle adopted in scientific research generally, which is to calculate the probability of the available evidence if the hypotheses were true and compare them. So what is the probability if it were true that he committed suicide and that he's actually deceased? That we would have the cameras going out, we'd have no video footage, we'd have no facilities for committing suicide within the facility, that we'd have a world-famous medical expert concluding that the evidence from the autopsy is inconsistent, that we'd have a faked body on a gurney that's not even in a hospital. It isn't rocket science to realize the probability of all of that evidence, if this were real, if he actually had committed suicide and were dead, is extremely low. In fact, I'd suggest it's approximately zero. Now, I draw a distinction between zero and no. No means absolutely impossible. Zero means incredibly improbable, right? The might happen 1 in a trillion times. I mean, I'm telling you, not reasonable in science. The tendency is to reject an hypothesis if it's even, has a 5%, only a 5% probability. Well, this is obviously far beyond a 5%, below a 5% probability. So it's a rejectable on scientific grounds, whereas on the alternative, that he's actually alive and this was a fabricated event, all that same evidence, the lack of facility to commit suicide in the cell, the cameras going out, the photoshopped image on the gurney, that it's not even in a hospital, the report of the van and all that, have a high probability. So I don't think it's really seriously debatable that the weight of the evidence supports that Jeffrey Epstein, in fact, was taken out of the facility, and in my estimation, the most plausible explanation is he's been placed in protective custody. There are other experts who agree with me about this. Robert David Steele, for example, is quite a notable figure on his website and in his blogs at Robert David Steele. Mm-hmm. where the guy's former CIA become a major whistleblower. You can find a lot about Jeffrey Epstein and his reasons for drawing the same conclusion as have I. So what is done, and this is really quite fascinating from a legal point of view, given that he's been declared dead, it means that there's not a living person to dispute the admissibility of a whole mass of evidence about Epstein. That means it can all come into court in legal cases without being opposed in terms of its admissibility. Also, of course, we've had the case where, 17, 18, 19 of those who had been induced or forced to participate in these improper sexual activities have made statements in court just the other day, the most important of whom is Virginia Roberts, who's now married, but who was a witness on all kinds of occasions and made very important testimony. She seems to be by far the most outstanding of all the witnesses. All that's coming into court. A lot of very high-ranking Democratic political figures are being identified. We already knew Bill Clinton was deeply involved with Jeffrey Epstein. While he insists that he only flew on the Lolita Express 4 times, the logs show it was at least 26. But that Bill Clinton has never been known for his veracity. It's going to draw on Hillary Clinton. There's very sordid, disgusting, actually completely appalling and sadistic actions of Hillary Clinton and Huma Abedin that were in videotapes on the Anthony Weiner laptop when it came into the possession of the NYPD, where even toughened New York cops who thought they'd seen everything were reduced to tears by what they discovered on those videos. I shared reports about their contents at the time with Jim Rothstein, also known as Jimmy Boots, who's a retired New York Gold Shield detective who cracked many pedophile cases in New York City, only to find them dismissed by the district attorney who refused to prosecute on political grounds. And when I asked Jim about this, where I've interviewed him before on this issue, he said no, he wasn't surprised at all, because based upon his experience, 70% of the American political elite, 70%, are engaged in pedophilia. Some of the names of the more recent revelations have nevertheless been surprising. They include Bill Richardson, the former governor of New Jersey, one-time head of the DNC. And to me, probably most surprising was a former majority leader for the Democrats, Mitchell, from Maine, who is also named. Others we already expected to be on the list, such as Alan Dershowitz, a celebrated professor of law from Harvard University, has been involved in many high-profile cases, including, for example, O.J. Simpson, where I actually lost a sabbatical over that case. I was so absorbed by it that I recorded all of the trial testimony and all of the discussion, where Geraldo at the time was actually serving a useful function for the American people by doing all the fringe issues that the mainstream was reluctant to delve into deeply by bringing the best experts onto his show to discuss it in great detail, where Alan Dershowitz played a major role there. He was also on the defense team. But that was really fascinating stuff. In the end, I had a massive pile of videotapes, such that my wife and daughter, if they thought I was somehow misbehaving, would threaten to tape over my own tapes if I didn't straighten out. A little family humor there. Now, so I think that's a situation with Epstein that is moving forward. It appears this Ghislaine Maxwell, this woman who aided and abetted by recruiting these girls, is going to be prosecuted. She may very well work out a deal where she's going to testify and reveal a lot of what she knows in order to get a better break. We had a rather fascinating revelation that is one of the UK papers, I think it was the Daily Mail, about a visit some business people had made to Epstein's property in New York City, which turns out to be the largest private residence in Manhattan. And passing through one open door into a den, there was this huge painting. I think it was a photograph that had been painted over of Bill Clinton in a blue dress, shades of Monica Lewinsky, and red pumps, extending his finger in a come hither look. You can actually find the photograph of the painting online and other fascinating revelations. So that's my take on the Epstein case. It really, as it moves forward, holds the key to draining the swamp, because this pedophile operation has been the way in which the Israelis have maintained control over our government, at least one very direct way among many others. As Cynthia McKinney revealed, it may have been 10 years ago, new members of Congress, or those who are running as candidates, are asked to sign a pledge to put the interests of Israel ahead of those of the United States. And if they don't sign the pledge, which has been the exception rather than the rule, then they find their funding dries up, they can't run, or once they're in office, they find they're confronted with a well-financed alternative candidate, or that their district has been redrawn and they no longer have a seat. Now, Cynthia was able to transcend those obstacles and serve 6 or 8 terms in the House, but even as notable a figure as Dennis Kucinich, and I have a photograph of Dennis right here in my library, I can see from where I sit, when he came to the University of Minnesota Duluth and gave a talk, and came up into the audience, and the talk show host who featured me was in the row behind, and when Dennis came in, and I looked up toward him, he took a photograph that was just wonderful that I framed there, a large photograph, 8 by 10. Even Dennis Kucinich, whom I regarded as the smartest member of Congress at the time, was unable, when, got the boot. He was really, really good. So I say there's much going on here. I would like to believe there's going to be a great unraveling, but we have the problem that Donald Trump himself, whom I supported for president, especially based upon his claim that he was going to get us out of the Middle East. They thought these wars had been a huge mistake. He was going to put America first. He was going to reallocate all those resources that were being squandered on the wars. At least new resources would no longer be allocated to benefit the American people, which turns out to have been the basis for his election. In fact, studies done by Boston University and the University of Minnesota have shown that it was voters in rural counties in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin, which had suffered high casualties from the Middle East wars, voted for Trump in the belief, no guarantee of course, that he was the less likely of the two candidates to continue those wars, and that was most assuredly a well-founded vote to cast at the time, because Hillary was a warmonger. She brought about the massive assault on Libya, which is a catastrophe of the greatest order, because Muammar Gaddafi, no matter how demonized in the American press by propaganda inspired by the Israelis, and Americans need to understand the extent to which Israel controls our mainstream media. As an aside, I have a panel of 100 executives from CNN, for example, all of whom are dual U.S.-Israeli citizens. I have another panel from NBC of 100 more executives, all of whom are dual U.S.-Israeli citizens. I have another panel of 100 executives from the New York Times, all of whom are dual U.S.-Israeli citizens. Gaddafi had created what may have been the closest to a humane society ever realized on earth. National health care, national public education. Newly married couples got a $25,000 gift and a new home. If you had a medical problem that couldn't be dealt with in Libya, you and a friend or relative would be transported, all expense paid, anywhere in the world to have it dealt with. At government expense, but he was also introducing the Great Waterworks project that would have turned North Africa into a veritable oasis, and he was introducing the gold dinar, a gold-backed currency that would have rapidly become the currency of all of Africa. From the WikiLeaks revelations, we have learned that Hillary initiated the attack on Gaddafi because France was unhappy with his growing influence and wanted to keep Africa as its own neo-colonial preserve, and that the Rothschild banking empire was threatened by the gold dinar. Where the Rothschilds, and of course these are Jewish bankers, I mean this is no secret, had a difficult time securing a foothold
in the Middle East, because Islam eschews usury. In other words, if you're a Muslim, you do not believe in making money off of money by compound interest, for example, which has been sometimes described as the greatest evil ever designed or conceived by the mind of man. It's why we have this fantastic national debt, because we give an interest to the Fed for printing the currency of the United States. One of the reasons Jack was whacked, I'm convinced, is that he had directed the Department of the Treasury to print United States notes, which were non-interest bearing and backed by the United States in lieu of Federal Reserve notes. I recall as a young Marine Corps officer holding one of these notes in my hand, and it had a red embossed imprint instead of green, and it said United States note instead of Federal Reserve note. Well, he had hundreds of millions of these notes printed.
Wow.
But of course, that would put the Fed out of business. So that our national debt is really largely imaginary. It's based on the interest we owe to this consortium of private banks, and the American people have to understand that the Federal Reserve is not a federal institution. It's a consortium of private banks, and it's not a reserve. It's just a nice name for a giant scam on the American people. And if the Donald were to do something, a single stroke, that would be of enormous benefit to the American people. It would be to abolish the Fed. Remember how Ron Paul told us again and again, he can't even get Congress to audit the Fed, much less abolish the Fed.
Exactly.
So, it's truly outrageous. But if we have a currency revaluation, if a new currency is introduced into the United States, it may come with the attendant abolition of the Fed. This would be my great hope. In any case, the problem is that we have too many indications that Donald Trump is himself overly enthusiastic about Israel. When he gave his campaign talk to AIPAC, the American Israeli Political Action Committee, which, by the way, JFK had its precursor, the World Jewish Congress, register as a foreign agent, but no president since has had the balls. AIPAC, the most powerful lobby in the American Congress, when Trump spoke to them, he said he'd be the strongest president for Israel in American history, and he certainly borne that out. He's designated Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. That was outrageous, because Jerusalem should be part of a complex settlement with the Palestinians, should be an international city, jointly shared, parts of it for Palestinians, parts for the Israelis, and so on. He has designated the Golan Heights to be Israeli territory. Well, the rest of the world regards the Golan Heights as Israeli-occupied Syrian territory. There's been a vast reserve of natural gas discovered beneath the Golan Heights, which is, of course, another reason why Israel covets the Golan. There's even a suggestion they're going to rename it Trump Heights. He's also unfunded the UN agency that supports Palestinian refugees. That was a particularly brutal and inhumane action. Now, I have a brand new report I've just been covering this last week that Trump actually converted to Judaism in 2017, that he'd held out because he was worried it would alienate his evangelical Christian base. But many of the evangelicals are Zionists who believe in the apocalypse, and there must be a war in the Middle East to bring about the return of Jesus Christ to earth. In any case, we have a report from David Goldberg that someone he knows very well, a Jewish woman who was an advisor to the White House, was fired, terminated from her role at the White House because she revealed that Trump had converted it as a Jew. There's a video that I played on my most recent programs, and you can find it on the Goldfish Report, which is I tweeted. I'm on Twitter at Jim Fetzer. In one of my most recent tweets, you can find that in both the Goldfish Report, and I may have put it up separately. It's really stunning stuff, where David Goldberg interviews this woman who's explained how she was fired, and how she's very upset about being fired, and how she believes that the White House doesn't want this information out, and it's obvious why they don't. It's so politically explosive. Where personally, for example, I don't care if one is a Christian, a Jew, a Zoroastrian, an atheist, I could care less. But when you have a figure in a prominent and influential political position like President of the United States, they obviously have a political and moral obligation to inform the public that that is the case. It's like if Michelle Obama wants to run for president, and I've long speculated that the Democrats have such an assortment of misfits and incompetents that none of them is going to have a chance against Donald Trump, with the sole exception of Tulsi Gabbard, whom they've rather skillfully excluded from the next round of debate, on the ground that she didn't have 4 national polls that showed her at 2% or more. Well, actually, she's got 26 that show her at 2% or more, but the DNC is only willing to count 2. So they have more artfully excluded Tulsi from the next round of debate than they were in sabotaging Bernie Sanders, where Debbie Wasserman Schultz, as the then head of the DNC, transferred 13 primaries at Bernie and 1 to Hillary's column to guarantee she'd be the nominee. And I find all this quite ironic, because it's my belief to this day that since Bernie's foreign policy overlapped with Trump's, and that was what was most attractive about the Donald, where the domestic policies represented by Bernie are far more appealing to the American people than those represented by Donald Trump. I believe if the DNC had allowed the democratic process to work rather than preempted it, that Bernie Sanders would be our president today. Given that Tulsi has been the person who has done the most to cover Bernie's back when he was under attack by other candidates, I could even see emerging from this, if the Democrats bypass Bernie Sanders, a third-party ticket. I think there could have been a viable one in 2016 if Bernie Sanders had accepted Jill Stein's invitation to run with her on the Green Party ticket. I think there could be a highly viable ticket of Sanders and Gabbard. They are really an attractive combination. She's, of course, a non-interventionist. Bernie's a non-interventionist. Trump has been so reluctant to get out of the Middle East, and there's so many indications that he's hanging in there for the sake of Israel, that even I, who have been a staunch supporter but highly critical of his failure to follow through in his promise of putting America first with regard to Middle East policy, could readily vote for Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard over Donald Trump next time around. I think that the country would greatly benefit from the emergence of a third party to break up the two-party monopoly. We have all these underhanded techniques run by the parties to guarantee who their nominee will be, only going through the camouflage of a democratic process by caucuses and primaries, where the DNC was a perfect illustration. And of course, it was out of disgust that Seth Rich, who was the IT guy for the DNC, who was a Bernie Sanders supporter, disillusioned over the way in which Debbie Wasserman Schultz was undermining his campaign, decided to transfer all these files to Julian Assange with the assistance of Kim.com, where they were downloaded in real time directly from the server in the Eastern time zone. And where I published a book about this. Now I have a new book, not with Moonrock Books, an independent book. It's called Exposing the Russia Hoax. It's only 132 pages. You should be able to find it online very easily now. It's inexpensive as an ebook and not a lot more as a paperback. But if you want an easy introduction to this whole scam from A to Z, I highly recommend Exposing the Russia Hoax. If you want to get even more serious, then with thorough documentation, go to Greg Jarrett's book, The Russia Hoax, which you can find on Amazon.com. My book, Exposing the Russia Hoax, may also be on Amazon.com, and so do I. Haven't had a chance to check it, but I know it's going to be very widely distributed, so I highly recommend it. Now,
great.
What this means is Trump may have a more difficult time, but not against any of these nominal Democratic candidates. They're really awash. There are all kinds of problems. Tulsi skewered Kamala and exposed her as a phony and a fraud, and she was also scandalized by the Jesse Smollett event, where Jesse Smollett is her nephew in campaigning with Kamala. The whole alleged hate crime in Chicago was manufactured. The two rednecks who are supposed to have assaulted him turned out to be Nigerian bodybuilders, one of whom is Jesse Small's personal trainer, the other's an extra on the set of Empire, where he is an actor. He even paid them to do this with a $3,500 personal check. How bad is that? We have video from the hardware store where they bought most of the equipment. It was done to support a completely unnecessary legislative proposal, an anti-lynching bill that she and Cory Booker had introduced, so that both of them and others were saying after the Jesse Smollett, this was a modern-day lynching to give an additional boost to the bill. But she's a disgrace. Kamala Harris made her way to fame in California by boffing Willie Brown, who was then the Assembly Speaker. He was twice her age. He was 60, she was about 30, and he gave her 2 plum assignments on California state boards because of their affair. I mean, it's outrageous that anyone should take her seriously. And in fact, after Kamala exposed that while she's running on a campaign of bringing social justice to black and brown people, that in office she had not done that. I have another blog about Kamala at jamesfetzer.org that goes further in detailing her hypocrisy. And of course, she's been falling in the polls ever since, even though I'm personally convinced she was the anointed one. She was supposed to be the candidate to go against Donald Trump. I'm having a hard time finding a viable alternative. I have a good friend, Rolf Lindgren, who's an expert in polling. He has a degree in statistics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he pays close attention to politics. We talk about it regularly, and I intermittently feature him on my show, The Raw Deal, which is on Revolution Radio Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. Rolf is most likely to be on a Friday. It's from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Revolution Radio Studio A, if anyone wants to check it out. You can also go to BitChute or to 153news.net and just look for The Raw Deal, and you'll see many of my past programs discussing issues like those I'm addressing here today. Now, I know you also want me to give an update about the lawsuit. Well, it's very, very interesting. I was sued by one of the fake Sandy Hook parents who calls himself Leonard Posner, because I've done a lot of collaborative research on Sandy Hook. I edited a book back in 2015 entitled Nobody Died at Sandy Hook, where I brought together 13 experts on the case, including 6 current or retired PhD professors, one of whom, Dr. Eowyn, had already published 80 articles on the case. I myself had already published 30. So I took the best of the best and put them together in a book that runs 446 pages about Sandy Hook, showing how we had been able to establish that the school was closed by 2008, that was loaded with asbestos and other biohazards, damaged by hurricane. There was even, it turns out, a major flood in the area in 2007, where Sandy Hook, oddly enough, is in a flood-prone basin. And where there were no students there, they'd taken an abandoned school and conducted a 2-day FEMA drill and presented as mass murder. We even have the FEMA manual for the exercise, which is included as Appendix A in the book. Now, when it was published on the 22nd of October 2015 by Amazon.com, it took off like a rocket, had sold nearly 500 copies when it was banned by Amazon on 19 November. So in less than 1 month, it had sold nearly 500 copies, at which point I immediately released it for free as a PDF. You can download it to this day by entering the title Nobody Died at Sandy Hook and add PDF, and you'll be able to download it to your desktop. And the great virtue is the book is no longer available in print because of a settlement of the publisher during this lawsuit, which I was unaware of and which I would have adamantly opposed, but which he felt was a prudent business decision to avoid having to deal with lawsuits in, say, 49 states that could drag out for decades. In any case, part of the settlement was to agree to no longer sell Nobody Died at Sandy Hook. But the book is still available in the first edition by entering the title and PDF, and you can download it to your desktop, where you have all the images and photographs in color. That's a great advantage over, for example, the black and white in the softbound, the paperback edition. We did publish a second edition in 2016. Now, pouring through what I published here, these supporters, these people who are trying to block Sandy Hook, and remember, those who feign being parents have profited immensely. The best estimates I have are that sympathetic but gullible Americans contributed between $27 and $130 million in the false belief that these families had actually lost children. And if you divide that evenly between the 20 families supposed to be parents of children and the 6 for adults, that's between $1 million and $5 million for feigning to have lost a child. Sophia Smallstorm has been very astute in observing these are capstone exercises that are actually farmed out by the Department of Homeland Security in arrangement with a community where they get millions of dollars for conducting these events, which is why there have been so many that have been, uncontested by the cities because they were paid off to do them and feel no responsibility for the political consequences or how they are portrayed. Even the school board received a grant of $50 million to construct a new elementary school at Sandy Hook. This was just a kindergarten through 4th grade school. And it turns out that nationwide they only averaged 7 billion, which I reviewed at the time of this enormous grant. They got 7 times 7 billion. In any case, Posner, the man who calls himself Lenny Posner, his identity has been very mysterious, but the judge thwarted all of my efforts to ferret out his true identity, found where I had described a death certificate that he himself had made available to Kelly Watt in 2014 as a fabrication. We published it in the book. We described reasons we had from multiple sources, including Dennis Camino, who was suggesting that it had been in part photoshopped. A fellow named Bob Sims was noticing that there were different typewriter, different fonts, that there were at least 3 different types. It had a dark texture part and a light texture, leading me to infer that it was the bottom half of a real death certificate combined with the top half of a fake. Well, because I declared it to be a fabrication, they brought a lawsuit on the ground that attached to the complaint was a documented death certificate, which, unlike the death certificate in the book that Lenny had made available to Kelly Watt, had a file number, it had a state certification, it had a town certification, none of which were true of the document I described as a fabrication. They claimed in the complaint that that death certificate did not differ in any material respect from the death certificate attached to the complaint, which in my opinion is a complete absurdity from the beginning, because obviously what could be more important material differences than the certification of the town, the state, and having a file number? It even turns out that Lenny had altered the death certificate in 2013 by changing the residence of the decedent, which frankly he had been living with his mother, from whom Lenny was divorced at the time, so he changed the address from the mother's address to his address, which is completely absurd. No one changes their residence after they're dead. In any case, this is a highly contrived lawsuit, and I was simply dumbfounded when the judge, during an oral hearing on a summary judgment, which can only be rendered properly by a court if there are no disputed facts in the case, but even the authenticity of the death certificate remained disputed. And it turns out, as a matter of Connecticut law, that not even parents are allowed to have a death certificate that's uncertified. So the death certificate that I published in the book was a fabrication on its face because it was uncertified. And in addition, I elicited the expert opinions of 2 forensic document authorities, and their reports were in the record. They had not only concluded that the death certificate over which I was being sued was a fabrication, but that 3 other death certificates that had surfaced during the course of the case were also fabrications, where one of them, Larry Wickstrom from Minnesota, said it was mind-boggling that the state of Connecticut would be issuing fabricated death certificates and different fabricated death certificates to different parties to litigation. In any case, the judge rendered a verdict completely improperly, in my opinion. I appealed to the Court of Appeals here, but they declined to hear the case, even though I felt it was very clear-cut. Now, the situation stands that there's a trial. He decided I was liable, and my
defendant Mike Palachuk, whose role had been restricted to suggesting the title of the book and authoring the preface where I put together the book. We now face a trial for damages where they're seeking $1 million in damages that'll be held the 14th to the 18th of October, assuming we stay on schedule. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is that all the way through this appeal process, I was representing myself pro se. We all know the saying. A man who has himself as a lawyer, is a fool. I now have an attorney highly competent from a major firm in Madison. I believe he's going to do a lot of good. There's much more to come of this case. If anyone wants to learn about it, they can go to my blog where there's a lot published. But you could also go to an organization called the College of Complexes, where I gave a talk about the trial to the College of Complexes on the 25th of May of this year, 2019. It was one of the most enjoyable presentations I ever gave because I had an hour to present, then they took 10 minutes of questions and answers, and then they opened the floor to 4-minute rebuttals by anyone. They could say anything they wanted, and several of them came up and made vicious assaults on me, and I loved it. I then had the opportunity to rebut. It was just a wonderful exercise in freedom of speech. So if you go online for the Sandy Hook, Posner versus Fetzer lawsuit and why it matters today from the College of Complexes, you'll find it, and you'll also find several linked articles that will bring you up to date on the case. That's where it stands now. And I really can't thank you enough for having this opportunity to speak with you. I know we had a lot to cover here, and I'm just grateful to have had this opportunity.
Yeah, likewise, James. I'm speechless. I mean, it's crazy what's going on, and with the lawsuit and with the Epstein thing and with the pedogate thing and the Federal Reserve thing. And what I don't understand is that all this fakeness. Look, what's the real next step? Is it just a waiting game that we have to wait, or is there something that we can actually do, or what? Like, there's irrefutable evidence of the Sandy Hook, of the 9/11, of the Epstein, of all this, of what's really going on here. A third of our...
It's massive. Is the Democrats' gun control agenda. What they have decided is they're going to campaign on racism, right? Once the Russia hoax fell apart with Mueller's testimony, which was a disaster for the Democrats, and the whole world discovered that we'd had 2.5 years of nonstop propaganda from the mainstream media, particularly from the liberal outlets like MSNBC and CNN, which have been totally discredited, they realized they had to change their themes as their platform now is racism, 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 but frankly, that's not really making much impact. Nobody believes Donald Trump is a racist. People who've worked with him for decades recognize that he actually had wonderful relations with, members of all races. He's not a bigot. But also, gun control, that's a major issue. So we've had all these fabricated cases to promote gun control. It's a colossal blunder because it turns out they're completely ignoring the defensive use of guns, which turns out to occur between 500,000 and 3 million times every single year. American citizens protect themselves from criminals for their life or their property or other violence by the use of guns. This was a study that was sponsored by the CDC, and it showed that Americans are actually saving on the order of 200,000 American lives every single year. Taking guns away from law-abiding citizens does not promote their safety, quite the opposite. And it should be obvious if you look at Chicago, for example, which has among the most stringent gun control laws in the nation, that taking guns away doesn't work. It creates free fire zones. Worldwide demographics show that the countries with the highest level of gun ownership have the lowest homicide rates. The United States and Canada, for example, have high gun ownership and low homicide rates. South American countries like Brazil, low gun ownership, high homicide rates. African countries, low gun ownership, high homicide rate. Russia, low gun ownership, high homicide rate. You might ask, how's that possible if they don't have guns? Well, there are plenty of ways to kill other people. In the UK, when London banned guns, they had a knife epidemic, and now the mortality rate, the murder rate in London equals that in New York City. So that people are going to use other weapons, especially knives. When that happened in London, I said, what are they going to do now? Ban potato peelers? That's what they did. They banned potato peelers. So I tell you, this whole gun control thing is a complete phony baloney. They want to disarm the American people. Where, I can't make this point too emphatically, as Dave Hodges has observed, during the 20th century, there were 19 democides or slaughters of whole societies, each of which was preceded by gun confiscation. Don't let America become number 20. I have said many times, and this may be for what I am most long remembered, when they come for our guns, the time has come to use them.
That's right.
Take the Democrats apart. Don't be an idiot. Don't let them take your guns. Then you'll have no way to protect yourselves or your families. Even if you give up your guns and call the police because there's an intruder in your house, on the average it takes around 20 minutes for the cops to show up. So you're waiting for them to come with their guns because you don't have any. In the meanwhile, your daughter may have been raped, your wife may have been murdered, you may have been mugged. We have to be able to defend ourselves. It's right ensconced in the Constitution in the Second Amendment. The Founding Fathers, by the way, regarded all residents as citizen soldiers and thought the greatest way to preserve the freedom and integrity of the United States was to refer to them, the residents, the citizen soldiers of each state, as a militia, so that the citizen soldiers of each state could oppose tyranny, including by their own government. Emperor Hirohito contemplated invading the United States, but he was warned by his high-ranking military advisors that there would be a sniper behind every blade of grass. He declined to do it. Having over 100 million armed Americans is the greatest source of national security this nation has ever known. We cannot give up that advantage. It would be stupid. So every time you hear the Democrats talk about gun control, just recognize they're living in some state of mass illusion. They're completely uninformed about the facts of the matter, because they'd have you believe that the more guns, the more gun violence, but the facts are precisely the opposite.
That's right. And and whether it's disillusionment or not, I mean, it seems like it's an agenda. I mean, no, how can you be that smart to get up to Congress, but then do things like that? Nothing correlates.
Should be writing letters to the editor, calling their congressman, oppose this gun control, speak up for freedom and democracy. The Democrats are going to try to rig the election. Here's something else to worry about. The mainstream, the Google and YouTube have become massive instruments of censorship. Look, at the time of the midterm election in 2018, Trump had an approval rating by the Rasmussen poll of 50%. Even had an approval rating of 40% from the black community. I was predicting he would pick up 3 or 4 houses in the Senate and keep the House. When that did not happen, I was puzzled. It would be over a year before Google revealed it had altered its algorithms and was responsible for shifting as much as 76 million votes to the Democrats. That's why the House is not in the control of the Republicans today. They are gearing up for 2020. Google is going to try to control the outcome of the election. It has nothing to do with Russia. It has everything to do with a Google which is operating on behalf of the Democrats and the Zionists who we got to make America free for Americans. Don't let this be the United States of Israel.
That's right, and Project Veritas has evidence of that. So
Again, I can't thank you enough, and I'll be glad to return on another occasion. It's really good of you to feature me today.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. No, right back at you. I really appreciate it. I mean, the thing is that we're all just trying to learn. We're all trying to educate. It's knowledge. It's education. You need to think for yourself.
Yeah, well, you can go to my blog for more at jamesfetzer.org. You can go and you'll find a lot of videos are right there on the menu bar at the blog. So if you click on those, you're going to have access to a lot of videos. Alternatively, you can go to 153news.net and just look for the raw deal or look for Jim Fetzer. A fellow named Gus Chambers puts up most of my videos, so you'll find a lot under the name of Gus Chambers. And follow what's going on out there. Speak up. Speak up. The best thing you can do is speak up.
Exactly.
And support. I think Tulsi Gabbard is just a terrific person, and she enriches the discussion. And the Democrats are trying to manipulate the outcome in a more subtle fashion than they did with Bernie by sabotaging his campaign. Just become involved political. Speak up for your rights, because believe me, if the Democrats have their way, you won't have them much longer.
Yeah, unless they're all just pawns, and then we have we're gonna have even more serious problems than we already do. It's getting real fishy out here. It's getting real fishy. The Epstein being tied to alphabet agencies and Mossad and this and that, and the billionaire and the videotapes and the Ghislaine and all the pedogate stuff and all the ridiculousness. I mean, to wrap this up, how can I to ask you this question? What, for people who are trying to wake up, who are trying to educate themselves, what can they do besides, the best advice that I can think of is just to educate yourself, to learn more about it. But is there anything beyond that?
Go to moonrockbooks.com, because think of that as your conspiracy catalog, because we have books on JFK, 9/11, right, Sandy Hook, the Boston bombing, Orlando and Dallas, Charlottesville, Parkland. We have a book in the works on Las Vegas. But think of that as your repository of serious scholarly research on conspiracies. Think of it as your conspiracy catalog.
Fantastic.
And if you're so inclined, you could have the opportunity to make a donation to my legal defense fund, because it may get more expensive as we go along, bringing in witnesses and all that, if you're so inclined. But don't feel under any obligation whatsoever. This was a lawsuit that was a slap suit, a strategic lawsuit against public participation to discourage persons like myself from speaking out about what's really going on, by setting an example, by punishing those of us who are trying to get the truth out to the American people. Masquerading as a defamation lawsuit, there was no defamation. What we said, describing the death certificate as a fabrication, was correct. It has been vindicated. The lawsuit was an absurdity from the beginning, and I do believe that it may take some time, but that I will have this straightened out. Meanwhile, you want to know what's going on, I've given you several leads as to where to go and how to figure it out.
Right. All right, well, thank you very much, Jim. Till next time, and, keep on fighting the good fight, and as always, the good guys are winning. It's taken a long time. The fight's going a long time, but hey, we're getting somewhere.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to come back again.
Thank you. Take care. Bye. Alright, well, there you have it, folks. The one and only Jim Fetzer. So, that concludes today's show. We really wanted to get that going. Oh, hold on, let's see. Hello. Hey, hello? Oh, whoops. Well, anyway, wasn't sure if he's trying to get back or what, but that's about it. We'll add all the information to the website. We'll be uploading this on BitChute. We'll be adding all this stuff. So, and there's more to come. So keep in touch. The good guys are winning. We'll figure it all out. Thank you very much. Jeezy's out.